streaming's underway. Thank you.
The council meeting of Wednesday the 21st of December, our final council meeting for the year. Welcome you councillors, the staff, media, members of the public and everyone who's listening in at home. We're having 2 visitors in today as well. Just before we start the meeting, we're going to finish the year on a more sombre note than we started it, and I'm going to ask you to stand shortly for a moment's silence for Councillor Latham, who passed away last weekend, and he'll be sorely missed by us all. He was a stalwart for the community, a great councillor, and we're going to formally farewell him tomorrow at the event centre. So if we could stand for a minute's silence, please. Thank you. We're going to start with the declaration by to-be Councillor Lane Braham in a few minutes. So Lane missed the inaugural council meeting because he was overseas, but we'll catch all that up now. So Lane, if you'd like to come forward and do the declaration. Which is up here.
Working?
Yep.
I, Leendert Gerrit Braam, declare that I will faithfully and impartially, and according to the best of my skill and judgments, execute and perform in the best interest of the Ashburton District the powers, authorities and duties vested in or imposed upon me as a member of the Ashburton District Council by virtue of the Local Government Act 2002, the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, or any other act.
Sign, right?
Oh, is that my name? Oh.
Left a space for it. Congratulations.
Back again. Feels like I'm going to be away.
Yeah, welcome back, Lane. It's really nice, good to have you back around the table. So, well done. So now we've got everyone inducted around the table, which is good. I'll call for apologies, and I have one from Councillor McMillan. So I'd like to move and second that. Councillor Brown, Councillor Ellis, all in favour, please aye. Leave of absence is granted. Any extraordinary business? I know of none. No. Declarations of interest. Got confirmation of the minutes. Count on page 3, the council meeting of 7th of December. Any alterations or corrections? Page 4. Page 5. 6. Page 7. So I'd like to move that in a second that we take these minutes of the 7th of December council meeting taken as read and confirmed.
Sorry.
Councillor Todd, Councillor Cameron, all in favour, please say aye. Carried. We'll receive the Methven Community Board minutes, which is on page 8. So I'd like to move that we receive these minutes. Councillor Cameron, Councillor Lovett, seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. We'll move on to reports. Item number 6, and the use of footpaths for al fresco dining policy. Welcome, Tony and Tanya. Anything further to add to your report?
Nothing further to add.
Nothing. Questions, councillors? So we've had the hearings, been out for consultation. Councillor Lovett.
It was only just a wee minor thing, in your plan and the policy, they had to submit a table and chairs arrangement. That's allowed to alter, that's not sort of standard. Once it's written in there, it has to stay like that. That was just one thing I just looked at.
I imagine there has to be some level of flexibility. A lot of the infrastructure, but things like Kelly's, I guess Kelly's is a bit more fixed, but if it's not fixed infrastructure, then we can't force them to keep the table and chairs.
That's right. It was just submitting a plan of it, and I wondered,
Yeah, I mean, there has to be an
was it
assessment.
permanent or can they change?
There has to be an assessment of safety against something, so I guess that's the purpose of the site plans.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on 2.7, the licence to occupy, just refresh my memory, the annual rent review stays at 1 year. Did we talk about discussing that to 2 years or not?
Tony.
Thank you, through the chair. So the rent, the licence to occupy fee will be set each year by council through the annual plan or the long-term planning process. Right. Council has that right at each time when you assess the fees and charges to keep them static if you'd like to.
Okay.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you for the draft policy. Point 2.3, and I'm talking about additional consents such as resource consents may be required depending for whatever the windbreaker is or whatever's required. We don't have any time frame around there. What is the council going to make best endeavour to respond to them in 7 days or 14 days, or how is it managed?
So that the normal building and resource consent timeframes are fairly set and standard. Are you talking about when council officers
say I buy a cafe and put a windbreaker up and I've got to get a building consent or council permission. So I've got to get council permission. What, do you come out within a week or a month or 2 or 3 days? Or
a council property officer will have to advise them that they'll have to get it, in consultation with
the building consent will go through the normal
process. So we probably couldn't put a time frame around when we'd go back. It would tend to be, unless it would give you some comfort that officers. Remember, we do have a communications policy that sets time frames around communications as well. So officers would be bound by that as well.
Righto, thank you.
Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. We're going to begin charging occupying fees from the 1st of July next year. What about the people who are currently paying?
That was the discussion we had at the workshop around potential equity issues, and it was directed to officers to have that leniency to the 1st of July for new licensed occupy holders. That's not to say the council property team will be going out to talk to those people who need licence to occupy and we'll get them in place prior to 1 July. But the direction to officers was to start charging new licence to occupy holders from 1st of July. The current, so the ones that have already got licence occupiers will have already been sent an annual fee and would have paid it. So unless there's a direction from council to credit their accounts, the payments will stand as they are.
No further questions. Someone like to move the recommendation there, 1 and 2?
Oh, I would like to move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Brown.
I will, thank you.
Further debate, discussion? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I just went for a walk through town before I came here on a reasonably busy morning pre-Christmas, and we're very lucky. Our footpaths do have a lot of space. I walked past those people who are going to be affected by this, and to me, I shouldn't say affected because I believe there is minimal impact on any of those who are there at the moment. So I think this is a very good policy, and I'd like to thank the team.
Good. No further debate. No right of reply required. I'll put the motion up. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Item number 7. Thank you, Tanya. Shade initiatives, UV sun protection. Anything further to add?
Nothing further to add, but happy to answer questions.
Questions? And you're recommending that we don't have a policy, not to develop a policy?
Yes, that's correct. We think that we can do it within our existing work programs, if you'd like us to.
No questions? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Brown.
I do. Thank you.
Councillor Todd, seconded.
Yep.
Speakers for or against? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item number 8, interim speed management plan. Welcome, Mark. Any further clarifications or questions? Or anything further to add? Mark or no, Tony? No.
Nothing further from us, thank you.
Councillor Cameron?
I have a question. Is that a good time to ask it?
Great time.
I thought when we discussed it in the urban area, the speed round the schools, we were looking at a variable speed. Is that right?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. When we went away and were preparing this report, it became pretty apparent to us that the budget that we've actually got available to install the signs meant that we couldn't give effect to that, hence why we've recommended what we've recommended. However, if council's of a mind that they're willing to spend more in this area, that can be done as well. Okay. But we wanted to give you quite prudent advice based on the budget we had allocated.
Okay. Can I ask an additional question? What is can you just remind me, Tony, of the budget, through the chair, of the budget, please? Remind me.
$600,000.
And the variable signs were over $100,000 each, weren't they? For the lot of them, yeah. So how many was that?
So 1.2 million, is it?
For the lot of them, but how many is a lot? Was it 10 or 5 or?
Mark?
No, it's a bigger quantity than that. I would just clarify with the variable speed limit signs, and at the hearings, Mo said if you've got variable speed limits in place, they have to be on all approaches to it. Martin went back and did a bit of work, so if you've got a variable speed limit, and I'll use the example of outside Burnside High School, if you go on there, the variable speed limit signs are on the main road going past it. Side roads with a stop or give way control and lower traffic can have a permanent sign there with the hours that the variable speed is in place. So applying that to some of our locations that can go, but it needs to be a low speed on a side road approach. It's got a stop or give way on it because vehicles are slowing down anyway. So based on that, there's about the cost of putting the variable signs and the other signs is about 1.2 million as in the report. So I think it's about 30 odd signs in total. They're not all variable ones, so we just need to do a bit more work on that. But the recommendation for having permanent speed limits at urban schools, and it's also based on the additional information on the existing free flow speeds or average speeds on those roads. If you look through most of those urban streets on beside the schools, the speeds are much lower than the 50 kilometres an hour, just because of the activity and the way people drive in urban streets. And it's the main roads going past it that we may have to do a bit more work on it and use our available budget to actually do some infrastructure work as well to determine where the schools are and warn drivers and make them aware they're driving past the school. The speed limit itself probably isn't going to change how people drive that much. Just need to have people aware that they are going past the school.
So can I ask another question, please, Mr. Mayor? When we saw the graph and the images at the workshop, it was half the town was covered as a school zone. If you're going to put, which I'm not against given the price, fixed signs in to say 30 kilometres an hour between 9 and 10:30 and between 3 and 4:30 or whatever they are, how far away from the school will they be? Is there a set government rule on that?
No, there's no set rule, and that's something that a lot of local authorities are working on how far you go, looking at a block on the approach. But it'll all depend on every school in every township and how they're set up and how many schools are in the area. For example, some areas the speed limit covers 3 schools in that area, and Ashburton is like that. Some towns, like Rakaia, will just have them outside their own school as well. So there's no set amount. It's just what seems appropriate for, not just for the school frontage, but for children walking and cycling to schools, is what the idea is of where they're going to the school. It's getting there and making that a bit more user-friendly and lower speeds if we can achieve it, but making people aware that there's that activity of the school on the approach, not just the frontage. So there's no set amount, and so we still need to do a bit of work on that, but there will be a lot of overlap, and some will go a bit further than others on the approach, depending on what's there in terms of footpaths and other infrastructure as well. So.
Will we get, do we get to see that information, and how far away the signs are from the schools and before they're put up? Does that come to council? I'm asking through the chair.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we want you to be informed of where we're actually going to put them. This, the speed management plan works on the principle, do we agree with having that in place? And then how it actually gets implemented, like any changes we can do under the plan, we will report to council and inform you what we propose, and you can agree or disagree with that or make changes to that, but that's the intention, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor Lovett.
I was just going to ask the government's what they're bringing in. They've got a standard rate, haven't they? Is it 60 k's for rural schools and 30 for town, or can we just do whatever we want?
No, we can't do whatever we want, but the direction is to be consistent across the country. 30 is the desirable at all schools because of lower speeds, and if there is a crash, a pedestrian is hit, then the chances of surviving are a lot higher than what they are at 40 or 50. So rural schools, the national direction is 60. There's obviously a lot less rural schools, but because we're proposing to have variable signs and rather than permanent speed limits on the rural ones, it wouldn't make sense to have it 30 permanent where a road that's normally 100 going past it. But during the times when it's busy, as we discussed the workshop, morning and night, have the variable 30 at that time when the activity is happening. That's where we want to invest in having the variable signs in terms of the electronic signs that flash on and only that lower speed at that time. In the urban schools, it doesn't affect us so much because the speeds are lower anyway. It's just the difference in speed. So that's why we're proposing 30. And submissions coming back and people's views from schools is why are rural children worth less now? Why are you making it 60 there rather than 30 as an urban school? Because the result, if you get hit, will be exactly the same. So that's why we've proposed to have 30 at our rural schools, as long as the variable speed limit signs that are there, not just a permanent 30 speed limit.
So another question, these variable signs, who actually controls them in the times? Are they automatic or is it up to the principal? Because if it's up to the principal, it could be there all day.
Well,
who controls them?
The schools and the council, so they're done through a web-based application. So you set the times for when you want to have it operate on a standard basis and for school holidays and things like that. So it's agreed on when the variable signs are put in place. So that's controlled by the school and council in agreement. But would have fairly standard times in other places where they put in. It's those busy times around 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock where you have them in place. But there is the ability to have one-off days if there's a sports day with extra activity. You can actually put them on at that time as well if you want to. But during school holidays they're turned off as well, so they don't come on during those times. So it's something that's controlled by both the school and council. We both talk about it, agree on it, and then put them in place.
Just got another question. I've had a few parents from the schools contact me. They're unaware that we're going down to 30 rather than the 60 k's, which is recommended. And I'm just wondering how big was our consultation to the parents in those 3 rural schools? Because most of them only just have one frontage, and we're putting this on all frontages, and one's, some of them are quite major roads, which I think, where we could get a bit of backlash. How far did our consultation, did it go to the actual parents into those schools or just the principals?
I know we went to the school into a general public consultation, so everyone had the opportunity to submit on that. So.
And further to that, many of the principals pushed it out through school newsletters and on Facebook and platforms like that to make sure they captured their wider community.
So you're happy with the consultation that was undertaken?
Yes, we are.
Yep. Councillor Todd?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I must say I'm decidedly uncomfortable in supporting the recommendation that is option 1. As a council, we did agree to instigate variable speed limits around urban schools. That's a view that I still hold. The policy we have to implement.
Councillor Todd, have you got a question? Because we're starting to debate, I think. So if you've got a question, we can
Not a
take
question.
it. Okay, well, that is debate mode.
Okay.
So we'll come back to you then.
Okay, cool.
Yep. If you would like to turn your light off, Councillor Hooper can come on.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Question, I understand budget restraints, and I would like to see it happen gradually as budget can allow. Is there an opportunity to put out signs, as in I'm thinking about and are there set specifications for signs that you have to adhere to? Could you have a 50k sign for most of the day, then at 9 and at 3 the school person heads out there and replaces the lollipop with a restricted speed sign? Is that an option?
I haven't heard of that an option, but my response would be no. I mean, if the speed limits are in place, whether it's permanent or variable, they're legal speed limits. So the legal instruments through National Speed Limit Register, so they have to be done in accordance with that register and what's been approved. I don't think you could put the responsibility on a school to actually be going to change the sign. And I would also say, I don't know if you've lifted out the signs and the poles and moved them, they're not very easy to move. And neither should they be. They need to be quite difficult. They need to be a sign that's permanently in place. So, no, I wouldn't go down that path. To have a variable speed limit, you have to do it in accordance with the signs that is required to make it a legal speed limit. And that is the variable signs, or either variable electronic signs or the permanent signs with the correct format and writing on it. Yeah.
So the variable signs via electronic means would be inputted and they'd be sort of set to go. That's not a thing that's inputted each day. That's what I was saying. If they were inputting that each day and changing that each day, then maybe they could.
No, it's on the variable electronic signs, the times that are set, and generally for the whole year, because the school terms, so it needs to align with that, and the times that you agree on each day, say 8:30 to 9:15 or something like that, and 2:45 to 3:30 when the most activity is happening. So yeah, they're set every day and they happen same time every day, and that needs to be in place as well and recorded so that for the police, if they issue infringements, they need to have the time when that speed limit, when it was actually that signs are operating and it was actually legally enforceable, and so they need to have that in place and a record of that, and the signs keep that.
Yeah. I guess if somebody was inputting a sign and got caught speeding, it could be a bit dicey.
That's right. Yeah.
Good exercise, but wellbeing boxes being ticked there.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's regards to the rural schools. I do recognise that the 30k is the safest speed for kids, but I drove past Legmore School the other day and I didn't realise at the time, but they have a drop-off bay. So I think I'm wondering whether there is if we put the variable speed of 30 on there's 3 schools in particular, Carew, Peel Forest, Long Beach and Legmore, those schools, is there an avenue for the community to revisit those if they find that the 30 is too restrictive to especially those rural communities? 100k speed limit on a dead straight road, it's very easy. I know the light's flashing, but I drove past at 30 and you feel quite vulnerable actually in the middle of a road going 30 thinking, well, I hope the fellow behind me recognises 30. So that just was one of my concerns.
Yeah, I think that if we put these in place as we're proposing, we should certainly be reviewing it and see how it operates and talk to the schools about it. And the other thing, we've got a speed management plan for the whole district that includes what's in the interim speed management plan, given that it's an interim speed management plan. What's in this plan is then will be part of the overall speed management plan, and we can certainly revisit the speed limits we've got at the schools to see how they're operating, because we probably don't know how it's going to operate, and the schools might find it actually hasn't improved things, or maybe causing other issues that we're not aware of. But so yes, it certainly can be revisited. Yeah, and I would actively encourage us to do that. I think that's what it would be remiss if we didn't. Yeah.
Just before I go to Councillor Ellis, I've got a couple of questions myself, and one is, what's the Wakakatahi doing with Methven and the Borough School, because those schools are on the state highways? What's their recommendation?
It's in their interim speed management plan, which has been out for consultation. They're having variable speed limits on the frontage in Methven of the school. So.
In the speed number?
Yes, 30 variable, so yeah, because it's in the township. So.
Yep, and the borough's the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if you were doing these, if we get to that stage of doing these signs, you're looking at doing the rural first, and then the urban second, and they need to be done by 2024. That 2024, is that a date set in concrete, or can it drift over that?
It's not a date set in concrete. It's just, I think the wording makes every endeavour, to have these in place. And in discussion with other local council, Christchurch City, obviously with the number of schools, they've got a few more issues in terms of getting it all covered. But for most rural local authorities, we looked at it and we thought, if we're going to do it, we don't why wait 3 years. We should be able to actually do them all in 1 year. And so that's what we're trying to do, have it in place before then. So that's why a lot of the interim plans includes the schools in it, because that's one thing we can actually do and be consistent on. And I'd say the consistency is something that across the country is something we've been working on for quite a while, and going away from doing something a bit different to other local authorities are doing doesn't quite make sense. We should be able to know that past the primary school, no matter where you are in the country, it's a 30k speed limit, would seem to make sense to most people. And if we all know that and get informed of that, then we'll know what we have to do. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. If we go to variable speed on all schools, and obviously we don't have the budget to do that immediately, who gets to choose what schools get the variable speed and what schools don't? In other words, who chooses whose children are safer at school than other children? Is it councillors? Is it staff? Because I certainly don't want to make that decision that I have to say your child's going to be safer because it goes to school X and not school Y.
It's probably a question that staff can't answer, but we can debate it, I think, unless you wanted to.
Through the chair, I was just going to say, as officers, we intended to bring you back that decision-making report for council to make that decision.
Thank you. Councillor Lovett, and I think we'll move on to a recommendation.
Okay. Just a question here. I'm just thinking, there's going to be, we're talking about loss of licences. We've got a road where a lot of people, it's a 100k road, and we're going to drop that right down to 30k's out. I'm thinking of Long Beach Road, and it's a major traffic link. Are we going to be sending out letters to all the contractors in the district, Fonterra and Sinlay and all the trucking firms, to let them know that the consequences, we're going from 100 down to 30, and just forewarning them what's going to happen?
I think they'll just look at the sign.
Yeah. Through Mr. Mayor, we couldn't guarantee to send a letter to every contractor that might ever use Long Beach Road. Their obligation as road users is to obey the road rules. So our effort will be on clear signage. Their responsibility will be to obey them.
We need to, I was thinking, do we need to advertise the fact far and wide, because it is a big major shift for what's going on in rural schools at the moment?
I'm sure we'll advertise through our normal media channels that we've changed the speed limits outside schools, so people will pick it up and they would see the signs to it, I imagine. But I think I'm ready to take a recommendation, and the one in front of us might not be quite the right one, because we did do the at the hearing we had, we talked about variable speed limits on the whole district. This recommendation has the word permanent for urban. If we change the word from permanent to variable in this recommendation before it's moved, I would be happy with that, and it might be the intent of councillors as well. So if someone would like to move along those lines, if they wanted to, Councillor Cameron?
I'm prepared to move it. I also understood we had variable limit for urban schools, but upon the questioning of, through the chair of the officer, I understood that this was going to be reviewed later on anyway. Well, did I get that right? That's what I've written here, can agree or disagree depending on location is what I quote, unquote.
Hamish?
Must be that the recommendation is deliberate and clear as written. How council, having asked all their questions now, wishes to deal with it is entirely over to you. But the recommendation in front of you is the clear recommendation from officers.
Okay,
What I
you want to make that amendment and I'll second the amendment.
Well, we don't need an amendment yet, we haven't got a motion.
Okay.
But if you wanted to change one word in this recommendation we've got here from permanent to variable, then we would have, and moved it, then we'd have a recommendation.
Point 3, I would like to change the word to the council adopts a variable speed limit for rural schools and a variable speed limit for urban schools.
You're moving that, and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder.
Thank you. Yes.
Seconder, Tony, Todd. Open for debate. Councillor Lovett.
I won't be supporting number 2 of this. Lowering the speed limit to 30 k's around the rural schools is my point. I think we should be doing what everybody else, the standard practice through the country. Go to 60, see how it works, and then drop down to 30 if need be.
Are you talking about a?
It is not a recommendation on the moment.
We're looking at an amendment, I think. Hang on, we're going to have to go around. Councillor Brown?
I'm not happy with this motion. The first one is great. Why do you want to use variable speed in a town? It's only in between the 50 and the 30. And the 30 will be more and more and more coming in towns. So why spending that money for variable speed signs? To me, what we've got here, without any changes, are great recommendations for this district.
We had the hearing, which Councillor Brum, you weren't at because you were overseas at the time, and council after that hearing decided then that they would recommend that it was variable speeds for the whole district, came out of that hearing process. But we can make a decision whatever we like here today. Councillor Wilson.
I can't support number 2 because I think from the information that the officers gave us that they will review it. Why don't we go for 60 and then review it? And if it's not deemed to be sufficient, drop it to 30 in rural areas. But I do support number 3 as it stands. I don't think we need to spend a lot more ratepayers' money to drop it from 50 to 30. Variable, it should be just straight drop to 30.
Are you signalling an amendment to number 2?
I'm supporting Councillor Lovett. And
you'll need to move an amendment.
Well, I'd like to move an amendment that rural schools, the council adopt the lowering to 60 k's variable in rural schools and 30 k's permanent in urban schools.
Variable in urban schools. You said number 3 was correct with us changing.
Yeah, number 3 is correct. Sorry, so number 2, change it to 60 k's
for rural schools.
Rural schools.
Yep. Carol, you've got that amendment? Yeah. It's moved. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Lovett is seconded. Open for debate. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just to talk about the variable signs, as I understand, a variable sign can be a fixed sign. It doesn't have to be a lit, expensive
We're just
sign.
debating now the 30k or 60k outside urban schools.
Oh, well, 30k.
Okay, that's
In those hours of,
Okay, because we've got an amendment on the table. We're going
Shall I
to vote
hang
on it
up?
shortly. Yes, please.
Mr Mayor, would it be simpler if we did these one at a time? Because we're going to end up with that many amendments here. So if we go line by line, because I think everyone's happy with number 1, so we can tick that. Number 2, then we can debate.
We're not sure whether we are all happy with them. I will take them one by one.
Yes,
I
think that's a good idea, and I'd be happy to move number 1.
We can't have any movers at the moment because we've got an amendment on the table for number 2. The speakers for or against the amendment. Councillor Lovett.
Well, I'm speaking for it. We need to go down to 60. Then, if it's not working, go to 30. And I think within this process, we need to go out to talk to each rural school that's affected and see what systems they've got in place for their roads and how they're managing their traffic, and whether they can sort of do pull-in bays and things before we go down to that drastic 30 k's.
I'll speak against the amendment, and 30 kilometres outside of school in urban and 60 in rural, a kid's a kid, a child's a child. Whether you hit them at 30k or you hit them at 60, we hope we don't do either, but there's more chance of surviving if they get hit at 30 than at 60. Is a rural child different to an urban child? I don't think so. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against the amendment. I think we need to listen to the submitters, and the submitters from Long Beach School were very clear that they wanted 30 k's variable outside their school.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I'm also opposed to the amendment, and in those busy times, generally there'll be school buses there, so they should be slowing to 20 anyway. At least we will be enforcing them down to 30 by doing this.
Councillor Cameron.
I'm also opposed to the amendment, and we did hear the statistics on what happens if you collide with a child at different speeds. And at 60 kilometres, it's significantly worse than if you hit somebody at 30 kilometres, God forbid. So I'm opposed to the amendment and think we should be variable 30 kilometres.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was not on the last workshop, but I've been sitting around the table for the last 6 years, and we've been going through it and through it and through it. I'm against the 60 k's, what has been mentioned.
Councillor Todd.
Yes, Mr Chairman, I think we just need to be consistent, and being consistent is 30 k's around all schools.
I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour, which is 60 kilometres an hour for rural, 30 kilometres an hour for urban.
Just one thing.
Right.
My understanding of the amendment is that it's all 5 of those things with 2 changed. So if there's any other changes, the whole thing is, all those probably going to be lost.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yes, my understanding of the amendment is that 1, 3, 4 and 5 are as written, and 2 is 30 around urban and 60 around rural. If the amendment is passed, job done. If the amendment is lost, then you have the opportunity to revisit how you approach all 5 recommendations because the amendment simply won't have been passed.
I'm seeing it slightly different. If the amendment is lost, we're back to the original recommendation, which could have another amendment in it if it needed.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I'm about to put the amendment, which is 60 kilometres an hour for rural, 30 kilometres an hour for urban. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? The amendment is lost. So we'll go back to the original motion, the recommendation, which is there. Councillor Cameron.
Do I make my amendment again?
What is your amendment going
My
to be?
amendment was variable speed limit
No.
for rural schools and variable speed limit for urban, or is that now the motion?
Variable has gone in.
As the
right
motion.
At the start, yeah.
Yep.
Variable is in. Yep.
Thank you.
For number 3. The word permanent has been removed to use variable.
That's what
Is it?
Yeah. So that's, if someone would like to move that, that's what we will then debate. And we can move the whole recommendation, and I can take them in parts if you wish. 1, 2, 5. Or we can take it as one. Signal? Individual? Right.
I think so.
Right. So I'll have a mover for recommendation number 1. Councillor Todd, you get a lot on.
I'll move, Mr Chairman.
The council adopts lowering the speed limit around schools.
I'll second that.
Second. Debate, discussion. Put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Carried. Bullet point number 2. The council adopts the lowering 30 kilometres an hour around urban and rural schools. Yep. Councillor Ellis moved. Councillor Brum, second.
Correct.
Debate, discussion. Councillor Wilson.
I again speak against it because I think there's 3 main roads that are going to be 30 k's when the schools have got mitigation in place to make it safer, and I think 60 would be a far better outcome for our communities in those 3 schools.
Further speakers for or against? I'll put the recommendation number 2. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. One that recorded? Or?
Yes.
No, one recorded. Item number Lynette, just Lynette. Recommendation number 3, the council adopts a variable speed limit for rural and urban schools. Council adopts a variable speed limit for urban and rural schools. Councillor Brown?
But that was, that's been moved.
Councillor Cameron?
I would like to speak in support of the motion.
We need a move and a seconder first.
Oh, I thought we'd already moved it.
No,
I move it
I'm
then,
looking for
please.
that. You have moved?
Yeah.
You've moved, and what you're moving is council adopts a variable speed limit for rural and urban schools.
Correct.
Yep. Second it? Attorney Todd? Seconded. Open for debate.
I'd like to speak in favour of the motion. Variable speed limit is a speed limit that varies throughout the day. So when the children are going to school and when they're coming home from school. So that would then be a lower speed limit for rural schools between the hours of whatever is a standard 8 and 9:30 or 3 and 4:30 or whatever those hours are. And that takes them down to a safe limit. And in the urban area, I feel that's appropriate as well. Bearing in mind that, as Councillor Ellis mentioned, that buses, you have to go 20 kilometres an hour, and also some of our roads do not allow a 50k anyway, so that's taken into consideration. So I think the variable speed limit is reasonable.
Councillor Todd?
Just a question, Mr Mayor. The funding for this program, does that come from NZTA or like where does it come from?
I think it's 51% will be far rated from NZTA and the other 49% will be councils, correct? Mark?
Okay.
Yeah, it's done under low cost, low risk funding. So we've got funding $600,000 in our current 3-year program. If we're going to variable signs, the funding for that will be in our 24 to 27 submission to Waka Kotahi for the funding in that. So.
Okay. That was I was wondering, can we, now that we're going to go to variable signs, which is obviously going to cost twice as much, can we go back to NZTA and say we need more money to institute the program, a program that you are putting on us, basically?
That's through Mr. Mayor, we can ask. I predict confidently the answer will be no. The low risk, low cost category got severely reduced in the last National Land Transport Program. So I would say there's zero chance of that request being granted.
We can just budget over several years to do it. Councillor Ellis?
Thank you. I'm opposed to the motion. With permanent speed limits around schools, people will get into the habit, and that way there we won't have any incidents. We're talking maximum 400-metre strip. It might take you an extra 25 seconds to drive that strip. That's your inconvenience. It's minimal. And we're all talking about being budget conscious. We all campaigned on being budget conscious, and now for this suddenly people want to spend an extra $700,000 on something that's not being recommended. I just do not understand it.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find it just throwing out money away. In town, most schools are near corners, so yes, you will be going slower than 50 anyway. 30 is a good safe speed, and if you look in the centre of town, it is quite all right. We came past here in the bus last week and went 30 k's. I was quite happy driving that along a school. 50, if someone comes running out, it will be in a bit of a mess. So I'm against this motion.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'm against the motion, the same as Councillor Brown, and that I agree the cost is one factor, that money could be better put in better places for safety, but also the 30 to 50 is not a great thing, great change, and it's a built-up in urban environment. 30 is where it's going in those environments.
Councillor Hooper?
Just got a comment. I know myself that the illuminated signs are so much more effective, and it's not hard to get distracted when you are coming up to a school or passing a school, and that is a great reminder. We've got our children's safety to think of. If we were to go to permanent, could we look at the boundaries where the signs were set and make those closer to the school boundaries, and therefore making the distance that the 30k applies to less?
I'm sure we can.
Yes, we could do that. The other thing, if the permanent signs, there's no reason why we can't revert to variable in the future. It's probably going the other way around is a bit more problematic because you spent the money on the more expensive signs, whereas if you do the permanent ones for a start, we can certainly, as part of our street management plan, review those, and some schools may lend themselves far better to variable signs, so it'd be another way of dealing with it as well. So.
Yeah, I just think it's crazy, the Borough School in St Joseph's example, where those streets in between the two schools are a problem permanently. So if we could look at the boundaries, that could save us some angst and possibly some money.
Councillor Todd?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Personally, Mr Mayor, I don't think we should be going for an option that is going to frustrate motorists who would have to adhere to a 30k speed limit 24/7 when we've got an option of having it as a variable while the school is in session. So that's why I seconded the motion.
Councillor Lovett?
I would support the town at 30, permanent at 30, and the rural schools have to be variable. You cannot have permanent 30 outside rural schools. That's they have to be variable.
Right to reply, Councillor Cameron, if needed.
No, thank you. Not needed.
I'll put the recommendation, and it's that the council adopts the variable speed limit for rural and urban schools. All those in favour, please say aye. 2, 3. Against? The motion was lost. Record against. So now we need to make a decision, and it would go back to the changing the word permanent to variable as written in the number 3. Could we move in a seconder for that? Councillor Brown.
Correct.
Moved. Councillor Ellis seconded. Speakers for or against? I'll put the motion. Item number 3. Rural schools are variable, urban schools are permanent speed signs. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? 1, 2 against. 2 against. Carried. Thank you. Number 4. Council adopts the principle on urban fringes as proposed with a 1 kilometre radius from a township's boundary. Would like to move or second?
I'll move that.
Love it. Second it. Councillor Ellis. Discussion, debate. Councillor Wilson.
Those changes come back to council, though, don't they? To be within the urban fringe, if there's changes, they come back through council.
Yeah, any changes to do with the speed management plan, any speed proposal will come back to council for adoption. Yeah.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I just have a question. The 1 kilometre for the Ashburton area, do you still feel that's enough? I know we deliberately reduced those rural ones because we thought that was plenty, but are we going to hinder ourselves with 1 kilometre for Ashburton?
Yeah, just in discussion with Martin Lowe, there's only 2 roads that really affects. Racecourse Road is one that goes slightly outside the 1 kilometre, but we can deal with that when we do it. And another one is in Rakaia, I think. The Rakaia Vale Methven Road is the same thing. It doesn't quite cover it, but we can work around that though. Yeah.
Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Number 5, that council adopts the principle on speed reduction in developed urban areas with a high number of users as proposed. Councillor Ellis. Moved. Seconded. Councillor Brown. Debate. Discussion. None. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Good. Thank you. Carried. Well done. Guest is not here yet. Number 9, Stockwater race closure. And that is on page 45. Welcome, Neil, Chrissy. Anything further to add to your report?
No, there is nothing further.
Councillors, any questions? No, we've had the hearing, we've been through the hearing, we've come up with this recommendation. Councillor Cameron.
If there's no debate or questions, I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
No questions, but we can take you as mover. Councillor Todd seconded.
Seconded.
Now it's open for debate. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I'm not always a big fan of compromise, but I think in this case this was the best solution and outcome for this one. And moving forward, once there is an alternative, we will then close another section of our Stockwater race network.
Yep, so items 1, 2 and 3, you want taken as one piece or taken as 3? As one? Okay. Speakers for or against? None. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So that takes us up to Bancorp. And Miles O'Connor's just joined us. Miles, have you needed a wee bit of time to set up, or have you? I think you do. You have a PowerPoint for us? You do. And Leanne, yeah, would you like to introduce Miles?
Through the chair, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce Miles from Bancorp. I've got to say Treasury. Miles is here today to give you an update on what he does for us here at Ashburton District Council, but also to let you know how the world is tracking, which impacts on us financially, particularly on our costs of interest, cost of debt and interest earned. So I believe you've all got the presentation, but I'll hand over to Miles to take us through it. Thanks.
Yeah, we do have it, but you've got it here as well, which is great. So we got it given to us earlier. Yeah. Floor's yours, Miles.
Thank you for the introduction, Leanne, and your worship. Thank you for having me here to present to you this afternoon. So I'm not sure, is it sort of half an hour or 40, how long have I got?
Or
A little bit less than that.
Yeah. Less? I mean, I can scoot through the presentation, so...
Yeah, questions is important, so if you get through the presentation, then we can take some questions and...
Sure,
okay.
So I might just skip some of the slides, they're not, you know, not as relevant, I just thought if I needed to. As far as Bancorp Treasury Services goes, Bancorp was established in 1987, got offices in Auckland and Christchurch, subsidiary in Australia. We're the largest treasury advisor in Australasia. We don't provide transactional banking services, so we're fee-based. Our only objective is to help clients. We don't derive any benefit from however many or however few transactions you do. It's just obviously what we want to do is make it as advantageous as possible for you. We've got about 220 clients around New Zealand that we advise on an ongoing basis on their treasury risks. So that's either funding, interest rates, and there's the other side of it, which is foreign exchange, which doesn't apply to you. And we've got about 35, I actually think it's about 38 now, local government clients in New Zealand. So it's actually our biggest sector that we advise on. What we do for Ashburton, we've been providing treasury services for 12 years, and that encompasses ongoing funding advice, so you obtain all your debt from the local government funding agency, or the LGFA as you probably know it. Ongoing interest rate risk management, which is how much fixed rate debt you have and how much floating rate debt you have, the use of fixed rate bonds and to a lesser extent interest rate swaps, because that's how we achieve the fixed rate hedging to achieve the minimum and maximum levels. I'll show you those later on. Our aim is to achieve the lowest cost of funds for you, or an acceptable cost of funds, guard against higher interest rates, which isn't possible, 100%, but also take advantage of lower rates. advising on the debt maturity profile, financial market investment, which is bonds, term deposits. We review the Treasury policy generally every 3 years in conjunction with the long-term plan. And inherent in our services that we meet on a quarterly basis, that, I mean, we sort of lost our, well, not lost our way, but it wasn't quite possible for 2 years with COVID. But in normal times, we meet once a quarter. And the whole thing about us is that we have to be proactive. You know, we don't expect you to be ringing us saying, hey, what should I be doing? It's the onus is on us to be ringing you to say, you know, look, this is what's happening. But I mean, but often it's a reverse inquiry, because I mean, you might just say, look, you know, I need $10 million or $20 million of funding. So, and that can actually come up quite quickly with some clients. So that's what we do. As far as what's happening in the financial markets, it's a bit of a play on words, this one, but it's what financial markets is. Shock and awe continues, or as in the Governor of the Reserve Bank, or AWE as it's sometimes referred to, especially with the last monetary policy statement. He increased the cash rate by 75 basis points. Now, the headlines were quite sort of dramatic, where they said, biggest ever rise in the OCR, which it was. You know, or panicking, but the markets were, well, they were 70% expecting it to be a 75 basis point hike. They were assigning a 70% probability that it would be, at a 100% probability that it would be 50 basis points. What surprised everybody was that he came out and he revised, because every 3 months they have a projected track for the official cash rate. Now, back in August, it was 4.1. was the peak, and in this one he jumped it up to 5.5. Now that's a very big increase over 3 months. But the other thing was that he said we need a recession. They want a recession. He was telling people to cut back on spending. I think he said, what was it, pull the jets in or something, was the phrase that he used, or something like that. But you know, it's quite unusual for a Reserve Bank governor to say, right, stop spending and let's see if we can push the country into recession to control to get inflation under control, because the whole thing at the moment is, I'll just spend a couple of minutes on this because it's quite important, it's inherent, and it's sort of fundamental to what's happening, is that inflation is 7.2%, and it's the highest that it's been in about 30 years. Now, this is a result of COVID and the amount of stimulus that was pumped into the system. In other words, they call it quantitative easing, QE, and that's the government stimulating the economy to alleviate the effects of COVID. But what they didn't know was that it was going to lead to this runaway inflation. Now, I've had other councillors say to me at other organisations, you know, well, you should have picked this rise in interest rates. I mean, we didn't think it would go this high, but as I say, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand didn't. I mean, they were telling us 2 years ago that interest rates were going to go negative. You had the Federal Reserve in the US with their 800 PhD trained economists. They didn't pick it, and there's a slide later on which shows it as well. So it was just this inflation that we've got, which has resulted in this pretty severe monetary policy response by raising the official cash rate. It just wasn't seen because we haven't been in that situation before in the world. As I say, RBNZ happy to have a recession, but the other point is that the other central banks around the world are now starting to say, well, we will be raising interest rates, but we're going to moderate the pace of the increases. Whereas our Reserve Bank came up with a 75-point hike and a very large increase in the projected track. So they're the outlier at the moment. I mean, and this is typical of Governor Orr. You know, he seems to want to be different. He seems to want to stand out. But, you know, we're fearful of what will happen next year with the economy. I won't go through the rest of it, but just quickly, that is that sort of encompasses what's happened with monetary policy over the last 2 years or so. So the black line is the New Zealand 10-year bond rate, and the red line is the US 10-year bond rate. So you can see that they do follow each other, but going back sort of 2020, we were the same as the US, and then we broke away a bit because our central bank was one of the first in the world to signal that they would be raising interest rates, and we were the second in the world to actually start raising rates behind the South Korean central bank, I think. And you can see that, you know, we moved above the US, although we are closer to them now. But what's happened recently is that you can see that 10-year rate just in the last month or so, where it's come down at the very right-hand side of it, and that's because the markets are starting to focus on the recession trade. In other words, the consequence of all this monetary policy tightening will be a recession, both in the States and in New Zealand. So while, and this is a bit unusual, I mean, people ask us what are interest rates doing, and I say, well, which ones are you talking about? Often, you know, they're going up or they're going down, but sometimes certain interest rates go up and some go down. Now, at the moment, the short-term rates are going up, but you can see those longer-term rates, that's a 10-year rate, has actually come down. So it leads to what we call as an inverted yield curve. I won't go into too much, it's a wee bit complex, explaining the maths behind it. But just to be aware that longer-term rates are coming down. Now, we're tentatively saying that we have seen the peak in longer-term rates. Those 5-year rates, I mean, at one point they have just dipped back up, they have flipped back up a bit, but those longer-term rates were down about 0.75% in the space of about a month, which is quite a sharp reduction. This is the OCR forecast, and it shows the Reserve Bank's projections in the light blue, which was from the August monetary policy statement when they had the peak at 4.1. Now the dark blue is the November monetary policy statement where they bumped it up to 5.5. But you can see that they are projecting it to start coming down again in 2023. So I think the expectation there will be that inflation is under control. We'll be in a recession, so they'll have to start easing rates. Now, the Reserve Bank have come out and said that inflation is a bigger evil than a recession. So they said we would much rather have inflation under control and have a recession than not have inflation under control but avert the recession. I'm not sure about that. I won't bother with this. That's the shape of the yield curve. I'm just showing you, look, you know, even New Zealand's biggest bank didn't get this right. So you can see they have progressively upped their forecast for the official cash rate. So back in February 21, they didn't think it would rise. Then they just said from its 0.25 level. And in May, they said, okay, to go to 0.5. And they progressively had to raise it. Now they're actually projecting 5.75. So here's New Zealand's biggest bank not getting it right. This one is it's a wee bit of a scary graph actually when you delve into it, because that's showing that we've got 11, 20, 30% of mortgages are going to reprice in the next 6 months, and then about 50% within 12 months. Now this is going to hurt next year, because we've got 340 billion of residential first mortgages in New Zealand. ANZ and Kiwibank have come out recently and said that half of their mortgages have still got a 2 or a 3 in front of them, in other words a 2% or a 3%. Now those are going to reprice, over 50% of them over the next year, and they'll reprice at probably what it is at the moment, 7 or so for a mortgage, 6 at the best, 7. Now this is really going to hurt the economy. I mean, we're seeing evidence of it. I was talking to a client yesterday in Nelson. They just said they're hearing of people having to sell boats and that. I mean, maybe you shouldn't have too much sympathy for them, but I hope not too many people got boats here or a mortgage on it. But I was reading an article the other day, the head of St Vincent de Paul in Hamilton, he was saying, you know, who help disadvantaged families and people, that they're seeing an increasing number of cases where families have a roster to decide who doesn't eat tonight. So who doesn't have dinner. I mean, this is New Zealand, so, and this is before these mortgage rate increases have really bitten. Because there is a lag between when you increase the cash rate and when you actually feel the monetary policy effects of it. Now, we are starting to feel it already, but this is going to get worse next year, so hence I hope I'm not being too negative here, but it just seems to be the outlet that's pervading at the moment. That is I was talking about the different rates there. So in red we've got the official cash rate, in black we've got the 90-day rate, and in blue we've got the 7-year swap rate, or the 7-year fixed rate, another way to look at it. So you can see that just recently that 7-year rate has come down, whereas the official cash rate, the OCR, and the 90-day rate is coming off, is continuing to increase. I won't go into this in too much detail, other than this is a pricing for the official cash rate, and the top grid is the 15th of June. Now, if you look at October 23, and 15th of June, they're projecting the OCR to get to 4.74. The dates on the left-hand y-axis, it's not a graph, on the left-hand side, they're are the dates that the Reserve Bank reviews the cash rate. You can see that October 23 now is 5.23, and they were projecting a peak of 4.74 in that first one. Now we're up around, what's the highest one? 5.44 in May next year. So that's projected to be the peak of the official cash rate. And then you can see the markets are actually projecting it to come off, and that could coincide with, okay, inflation's under control and we're entering a recession. Maybe the one problem, maybe if there is a difference in justifying why we're saying we're going to have a recession next year is because, but we're going to have to keep increasing the OCR is because of wage inflation, because it's very significant in New Zealand, and it's a bigger problem here than it is in a lot of other places. I mean, you just saw the firefighters the other week with 24% increases. Now these wage increases are putting quite a lot of pressure on the inflation rate. Again, I won't go through that, just in the interest of time. And that's just local government funding agency pricing. I mean, I'll let you look at that. But those fixed term rates have come down. That's the best thing at the moment over the last 6 weeks or so. Now, as far as Ashburton is concerned, you operate under a set of fixed and floating rate parameters in the Treasury policy which determine the minimum and maximum levels of fixed rate cover that you can have, broken down into 3 time zones or time frames. 0 to 2 years we must have a minimum, and I've got a graph on this on the next page, of 40% and a maximum of 100%, a minimum, and then 2 to 4 years a minimum of 20, a maximum of 80, and 4 to 8 a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 60%. And put graphically, that shows your debt at the moment at 86 or 87 million. That's the grey area, is your total debt. The red lines are those parameters. So the top one on each red line that goes out 0 to 2, then 2 to 4, then 4 to 8. That's the 100% maximum, 80% maximum, 60% maximum, and then the minimum amounts are in the red line on the bottom. So minimum 40, then it drops down to 20, then to 0. The shaded areas, the blue shaded areas, fixed rate bonds. So you have achieved some of your interest rate risk management or fixed rate hedging minimums using fixed rate bonds, which to us is preferable than using interest rate swaps. And there are a number of reasons for it. If someone wants to ask me a question, I'll go through it, but if not, it's fine. It doesn't take too long. Maybe I should. Do you want me to? Sure, yeah. There is, just one other thing. The green shaded area are interest rate swaps, and where the two are combined is that green line running along the top, which shows you that you're between the minimums and the maximums. The dotted blue line is the underlying funding that you've got. So that's the maturity. That dotted blue line is not your fixed rate hedging, it's the actual underlying debt when it's sourced, and it goes out to 2029. Now, there is a lot of publicity about fixed rate bonds, interest rate swaps, and that they're unnecessary and overly complicated and cost money. But used at the right place and the right time, they're good. But if the same outcome can be achieved using a fixed rate bond as using an interest rate swap, we'll always use a fixed rate bond, because I've worked out they're about 7 points cheaper, so 0.07% cheaper. Also, they only involve 2 coupon payments, 2 interest payments a year, which is because interest is paid semi-annually on them. Whereas if you used another method, so say you had a fixed rate bond out to 2028, you can have a floating rate note that goes out to 2028. The margin stays the same, but the rate on that floating rate note changes according to the changes in the 90-day rate. So it changes every 3 months, well, as long as the 90-day rate has changed, which it always does. But that means, and then we could put an interest rate swap over the top of it, and then we can achieve the fixed rate. Now, A, it's more expensive, but B, instead of having 2 transactions, you've got 8, because you've got 4 payments on the floating rate note, and you've got 4 reset dates on the swap, which coincide with the coupon payment. So it's a lot easier for Leanne and Erin to have a fixed rate bond. We're one main competitor, and they seem hell-bent on using all floating rate notes and all interest rate swaps. We just think that adds complexity to it, and there's unnecessary complexity, and actually it's costly too. It costs more than the alternative. Are there any questions on this one? It's a reasonably important graph. I mean, is there any?
Questions, councillors? Miles, I have one. If you've got a swap, you generally like to trade them. Do we trade them? So why would you have a swap?
The main reason is that we've had you can have forward start interest rate swaps. So there are papers written on why you should have fixed rate bonds, why you should have swaps. As I said, the reasons that I've outlined for fixed rate bonds. For swaps, you may, I haven't got a laser pointer here, but we may look at that graph and think, okay, we need some more cover further out, say starting in 3 or 4 years' time. Actually, if I go back to this one, that's actually the forward start swap grid. Now, actually I will spend a couple of minutes on this. It is sort of inherent in what's happening at the moment. So, and it goes back to the yield curve graph. Now, you look at the grey line across the top, and the 1 year swap rate is 5.32, but then, and then the 2 years 5.20, but the 5 year rate is 4.51 and the 10 year rate is 4.31. They actually have gone up a bit since I prepared the presentation. So we've got what we call an inverted yield curve at the moment. Normally, short-term rates are lower than longer-term rates. So longer-term rates are always higher, and that's normal because that's the cost of credit. Because if someone lends money for 10 years instead of 2 years, they expect a higher return because they've got a bigger risk. But we've got this unusual situation at the moment where longer-term rates are lower, and this is the inverted yield curve. And it gives you the ability, and it's highlighted in the blue, but it's what we call the sweet spot of the yield curve. So you could hedge yourself starting in 3 years' time for 2 years at 3.95. So that takes you out to 5 years, but the 5 year rate is actually 4.51. So it produces lower rates. Now, this is one of the big advantages of interest rate swaps, is that you can use them. And what I will look to do for Ashburton, if some of these rates in the blue actually get lower, is that we will give you more cover out longer. Now, we can't do that with a fixed rate bond, so we have to do it with an interest rate swap. And interest rate swaps, you can reprofile, you can add to them, you can decrease them. You can't really do that with fixed rate bonds. So I think the big one is that the big advantage is they're a lot more flexible. They do give you flexibility in certain situations. Now, just one thing I didn't mention about this inverted yield curve is that an inverted yield curve is generally a strong indication that we're going into a recession. We had one in 2008 before the GFC. So with the Reserve Bank Governor saying we're going into a recession, and with the yield curve pointing or suggesting we're going to, I mean, I think if you're a betting man or woman, then you would put money on the fact that we are going into a recession. So that's your debt and cover profile. That's your cost of funds. I think at end of September you're about 305. It has gone up to about 360, and that's just because you didn't have 100% cover. Now, as I said, I don't think anyone did because they didn't foresee the extent of the increases. But your cost of funds compares very favourably with a lot of other local authorities. I would say that you're in the bottom quartile as far as your cost of funds goes. And this blue line, the dark blue line, shows the projection for your cost of funds. And what it does is it takes all your fixed rate cover, but where you haven't got cover going forward, it takes the market's forward rate for the 90-day rate, which is the yellow mustard coloured line. So you can see that that's the floating rate going forward plus your margin. So that goes up sharply, but you can see that you actually don't go up that much, and that's because of the level of fixed rate cover and the rates that we've got them at. I mean, we've got some. You've got some bonds. I mean, I was looking at it the other day. You've got and this is the reason why your fixed rates, why your cost of funds is low. I mean, you've got a fixed rate bond versus 5 million going out to April 27 at 0.76%. You've got one going out, another one April 27 at 0.97, and then there's one for 16 million. At 2.01. Now, all of those rates are in the fours now. I mean, 0.76. I mean, pity we haven't got a whole lot of them, but it's still, we actually did go up towards the higher end of the percentages when we got these, just because these rates were so good. So I'm happy with your situation, and when we look at other local authorities, then I think you're in a pretty good space. I think that's the end of the presentation. Yes.
Those rates we've got locked going forward, are they swaps or are they fixed?
Fixed rate bonds.
Fixed rates bonds, yeah. Thanks. We'll move on to questions. Thanks, Miles, for that go through of the how it all works. Economics 101 told you that by dumping a heap of money into the economy, you're going to get inflation.
Yeah.
You learnt that at secondary school. Why did they miss it?
I just think it's because they thought that, COVID was unusual. We'd never had COVID before, and they thought that the economy would slow down so much that pumping a whole lot of money into the system would just keep it at an acceptable level. They didn't foresee that it would lead to this inflation. Actually, one point I didn't mention was that, inflation was going up as a result of it, and as I say, it was the unforeseen consequence. But we also had February the 24th with the invasion of Ukraine. So that was sort of the second leg up to it, when that obviously increased oil prices, it increased freight prices, wheat prices, food prices. So, in answer to your question, I think even the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he didn't see it in their 800 PhD trained economists, because they thought that the amount of money that was pumped in would just merely keep the economy at the status quo, and it would stop it falling into a hole. You've got to remember our Reserve Bank was predicting interest rates, as I said, to go negative, because they thought that would be that would be the effect on the economy. So I guess it was just it was the unknown consequence of COVID.
And the other comment I'd make is the OCR, if it takes another 0.75 next year, it will definitely go into recession, because as you mentioned, the 50% of the house mortgages are coming off the next 12 months, which will feed on to people who are borrowed money on their houses. It will definitely be a recession if they lift that interest rate. So hopefully they don't. I think there's enough shock gone through the system now. It'll hurt. It'll hurt.
Yeah. I was just talking to one of the young guys in our Auckland office, mid-30s. He's got a house in Sandringham. It's not, it's not one of Auckland's top suburbs, but he's got a mortgage of 1.1 million. He said it's going to cost him an extra $30,000 in interest payments when he refinances in the next, his series of refinancings. So that's $30,000 after tax. So you've got to earn $50,000 extra. Well, you don't. So what happens? Spending. So you have to cut back spending where you do, but also, they are having to restructure mortgages and make them interest only, and defer principal repayment. So, yeah, we've got a client who they own shopping malls, and he was telling me that in one particular mall that they've got, they have Pack and Save and Fresh Choice. And I think Fresh Choice is Progressive Enterprises, sort of upmarket brand, and Pack and Save is foodstuffs. Yeah, it's lower. It's cheaper brand, and he said they're actually seeing in that same mall that less people are going to Fresh Choice and more are going to Pack and Save. That's just one way that people are trying to save money, and there are lots of examples of it around the country. He told me the other day just about the amount of spending, because most of their mall expenditure, their tenants are non-discretionary, but he said the discretionary ones are seeing a definite decline in turnover.
The writing's on the wall. Russell.
Thank you. In a similar vein, moving forward, we're obviously going to be doing our annual plan in the new year. How prudent do you think we should be being in that? Because, if our residents are going to get hit with interest rate rises and rate increases as well, that also puts us at a risk of people having non-payment.
Yeah, well, as you said, we've got these mortgage rate increases, we've got the increased cost of food, we've got the increased cost of fuel, and actually I have been saying to people, increased local body rates, increased insurance costs. Now this is all going to hurt, and it is a question that I've had before. I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer to it is, but I do believe that households are going to be stressed, and whether or not it leads to rate arrears, I'm not. Well, you would think so. I was talking to one local authority recently, and they said they have seen an increase already. They're in probably it's a poorer local authority not as high a socio-economic local authority in the middle of the North Island. I better not be more specific than that, but they were saying they're already starting to see it. So You are in a reasonably good position though, and it looks like you're not going to have too much of an increase in rates. Now, the one good thing about that cost of interest rates, sorry, and that cost of funds chart is that if the cash rate doesn't go up to the same extent, in other words, the Reserve Bank are going to have to decrease the amount of the expected increases, or that we go into recession quicker, then that floating rate will come down. So that will actually, your blue line will actually go down as well with it. So if we do really hit the wall, inflation is under control, hopefully, then they may actually have to start decreasing the cash rate late next year. Now, we've got an unusual situation at the moment. We're in the middle of the biggest tightening cycle we've ever had since the official cash rate came in, and yet the markets and even the Reserve Bank are projecting that they're going to have to lower interest rates next year while they're in the middle of putting them up.
Councillor Todd.
With inflation running at 7.2 or thereabouts, how much of that do you think is domestic and how much is imported? Like, there's a bit of a blame game, obviously, by the government saying it's the majority of it's imported, but we think differently.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, quite a bit of it has been as a result of, well, the last leg up is the result of the invasion of Ukraine, so it is imported. But when you broke down the last, I'm just trying to remember the 7.2%, when that was broken down, the biggest reasons for the increase were fuel, food, rental costs. I don't think it actually had wages, but it was airfares was one of them. I'm a bit of an aviation geek and I follow the aviation industry now. If anyone around here is flown lately, you'll know what the airfares are like. I mean, I came back from Invercargill the other day, one way Invercargill Christchurch, $420. I just went to Auckland last week and that was about $700 return, and that was booked about 6 weeks ago. BNZ estimated that if airfares had only gone up to the extent that they had projected in their forecast, the inflation rate would have been 6.7, not 7.2. Now, I think that, Air New Zealand are able to do that because, as I say, when you're flying, you see that just about every flight is full. Going up and back to Auckland last week, I think there were about 2 seats on one flight. The other one was full. And all the ones, I fly most weeks and just about all the flights are full. But it seems to me that that peak in airfares, it's reached such a level that they're not putting them up anymore. They just can't. And so I think that when we get that, the next number, there won't be the increase in the airfares that was embedded in the last one. So that will actually help bring it down as well. But, and fuel prices have come down as well. I mean, they've come down quite noticeably, but okay, we are having the partial, the winding back of the subsidy.
Airfares are discretionary in some cases, and even in businesses today, we've now have Zoom, which we never had before, so savings to be made there.
Yeah.
Not travelling, just connecting a different way.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure who's travelling though. That's the thing, because I'm travelling a bit less than at Bancorp in general. We used to travel a lot of us used to travel all the time. Well, I travelled every week. I'm not quite doing that so much. I just think it's tourism more, and I think it's pent up demand from tourists who haven't been away. The borders are opening up. New Zealanders haven't been travelling as much, so they're doing that. I think there will be that pressure will come off next year.
That's good. Oh, well, thanks for that presentation. A little bit gloomy, but it is what it is.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, it is what it is. Thanks for what you've done for us, doing for us. It's good information. Councillors, no further questions for Miles? If not, thanks very much, Miles, and we'll see you again sometime.
Yeah.
And we see your reports come through quarterly, I think.
There'll be another one in January.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually one question. When's the next inflation data come out?
It'll be, it'll be late January, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll get the fourth quarter inflation data late January. One thing about New Zealand is that we only had the GDP data last week for the third quarter. New Zealand's one of the last countries in the world that brings its GDP data out. So, and that was the markets were projecting that the GDP, so economic growth, would increase by 0.8%, and it was actually 2%. So it was way higher, and that actually did push rates back up a little bit. I don't know why we're one of the last countries in the world, so it'll be interesting to see the next one, but the inflation rate is late January.
Yep. Councillor Cameron, did you have something?
Just a quick question. We heard, I think, yesterday on the news that business confidence was well down and consumer confidence was well down, which I presume is tied up with inflation and all the rest of it. What, does that affect, presumably it does, investment then in, in trying to get business to improve productivity and things? Is that not being just a sort of a catch-22 situation?
Yeah, business confidence is weak and consumer confidence is actually the weakest it's ever been since the main survey is the Westpac McDermott Miller survey, and that started in 1989. Consumer confidence is the lowest it's ever been since then. Yeah. But yes, it does have an impact on economic growth. And the one good thing about business confidence, though, is that they ask two main questions in the survey. One is, how do you see general economic conditions evolving over the next 12 months? And that is very seriously negative. And then the second question is, how do you see conditions in your own business evolving over the next 12 months? And that's quite a bit better than the general economic question, the answer to the how do you see general economic conditions evolving. And maybe just people are more optimistic about their own business, that's why they're in their own business, so they feel good about that. But what actually happens in reality, and this is if I can get some good news, and I'm glad you asked me that, because in reality, actual economic growth more closely follows the own activity reading than it does the general business conditions reading. So if there's one ray of hope, that's it. The other one is that, we are hearing that there are more and more migrants coming in, it's easier to get in, and that's constraining as well on the economy. The lack of people to work in hospitality, hotels. There is that is apparently, and well, even, farm workers, that is actually freeing up. So if we do open the borders more, then that actually will help the economy considerably next year. I mean, you go to hotels these days. Someone I know was just in Queenstown, and they just said they were staying for 2 or 3 nights, and they got a discount if they didn't want their room serviced. Hotels are having to do that all the time.
Thanks very much, Miles. It was a good outline there. Moving on, we'll go on to item number 11. We're just leaving the adoption of the annual report until we get the word from the auditor. It hasn't come through yet. So item number 11, which is the financial reports for October, November. Erin? And we'll just look at November's, I think. We have got both. Councillors, go through page by page if you want. Page 73, 74. 75, 76. 77, 78. 79, 80. 81, 82. 83 and 84. 85 and 86. 87, 88. 89 and 90. 'Caroline.
Just a quick question on the forestry thing, which is back to page 85. When we had a review, we had some log plantations fall down in the big wind last year. I thought the forestry, the silver lining was forestry prices were better than expected. I'm sure that's what we were told. But then when I read that, we've got poor export log prices. Is that because that wasn't the case, or there's been a change in confidence with regards to logs?
My understanding is it changed really quickly.
Correct.
Mention the China market.
Yeah, so we missed that little narrow window, whatever it was, to get gone.
Pretty narrow window, I think it was.
Yeah, and they still had to be processed, so the wind blew them over, but they still had to be picked up and processed and
I
sent.
understand, I'm not disputing that. I just remember the explanation was, oh, well, look, hopefully we'll get a good price for them, but somehow that changed while we were talking,
It did.
so to speak.
If there's not, through the chair, if there's not the tension between two good buyers, and often that's domestic and international, and at the moment we're not getting the international, that makes it hard for our prices to be.
Yeah, I understand that, through Chair Leanne. I just was contrary to what we were informed, that was all.
And a note there, the Forest will present a report when more market information is available, so I presume the report will come at some stage soon.
Correct.
Yep, thank you. I got up to 90, which is the loan repayments page, 9091. 92, net debt and borrowings. 93, borrowing by activity. Investments are 94. Receivables 95. Councillor Cameron.
Just through the chair again, the net debt, when is that going to peak? Is that peaking after the building, and what is that peak amount?
Can you remember that one, Erin? I'm a little bit, I know we tip over the hundreds, but I can't remember where we get to.
I think from memory, due to capital projects that haven't taken place, we've got the carryovers gone in. So last year we didn't get to the level that we had expected in the annual plan, or the LTP. So this year, as we go through with capital expenditure for funded via loans, I think it is around 105 from memory.
105 peak.
For the year, but that's if all capex takes place within the time frame.
We'll resend out the projection so that we get it absolutely right.
That would be good, because given that we've just heard about inflation and the cost of borrowings, it would be, might be timely to just review it and just get a bit of an insight into how that's going to be phased in.
Well, in reality, it depends on the annual budgets that you set. So all that prediction does around peak debt is take into account the work program and the LTP and how it might be funded.
That's right.
Whether that happens or not is a decision of council each and every annual plan.
That's right, because I take the word peak out, it's more the debt, isn't it? Additional debt, we need to just make sure that that's really what we want to do and just have a look at it at annual plan time.
That's right, but you'll do it. You do it when you set the budget. You have to actually take some work out in order to reduce the debt.
So we just need to be cognisant of our key infrastructure projects.
Page 97, the networks summary. Takes us to the end of the report. I'm just thinking that this report it takes a little bit to get your head around reading it. And I'm wondering if we didn't have a workshop on just this financial reports so you can ask more for new councillors, ask more questions on exactly how it works. We might be able to schedule that for after an activity briefing perhaps. May take an hour. Just go through it in a wee bit of detail, and you can ask real in-depth questions and getting understanding of what each department is and how it all works. That may help.
Yeah, we'll certainly do that. Mr Mayor, the variance report itself is intended to enable councillors to focus on where things are materially different to what you would expect from your budget. So that's its purpose, is to alert you to unders and overs compared to the budgets that you have approved. In terms of wider understanding of the council's finances and how it all works, then we're very happy to have a separate workshop on that, and we'll include an explanation of the variance report as well. But that's the purpose of the variance report.
It may be handy to have that before we go into the annual plan process, so we can.
You will have
they all tie together.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of conversations that council will be having over the next 3 or 4 months associated with budgets and expenditure and finances.
Yeah, and I think we've got annual plans scheduled in our diaries already for late January, early February, is it?
Yep.
Early February. Yep. Early February start the annual plan process, yeah. Councillor Cameron?
Just another quick question. Rates debtors, I can't see any, we've just had this talk from Bancorp, and they've talked about rate debt increasing. It doesn't appear that our rate debt is increasing at the moment, would that be fair?
At this stage, we haven't seen any significant point of concern, but the one thing that I was conscious of when I was listening to Miles speaking was a number of food banks who talk about the working poor. So next year does bode a concern for a lot of families, and we have to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
But right at the moment, not seeing a huge jump.
Thank you.
I think if you went back and compared rates debtors today to 5 years ago, you'd see they were a lot higher, I would think, but just a comparison, it's or it would be. So things are probably getting tougher out there. Yep.
We do, through the chair, we do work hard with our ratepayers when they reach out, and we do everything we can to put it payment plans rather than hitting them with penalty sticks, because that's not the way we want to work.
No, that's right. And a rates penalty is one of the worst penalties you can get, and you do work with them as long as they contact council early that they're going to miss a payment. Then there is avenues you can take to help them out. Yep, which is important. So I'd like to move that we receive the financial reports. Councillor Cameron, Councillor Lovett. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Next up, we have the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective. Welcome, Angela, and it's not Duncan. Janine, is that you replacing Duncan, are you? Or is Duncan on his way, do you think? Okay, we come forward too if you want to, Janine, and assist Angela. So you're just going to run us through what the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective is and bring council up to date. So thank you. And you've got a PowerPoint. Just noted that the report I went through was the October report, it wasn't the November report. So the November report's on Stella. If you have any questions of the November report which you wanted to raise, if you could do them after we've listened to the Catchment Collective. So apologies there. Angela, the floor is yours. Tell us about the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. I'd like to start with offering on behalf of the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective our condolences at the loss of your colleague and friend, Roger Leatham. I'll go on to say thank you very much for the letter of support that we received from Ashburton District Council to go along with our MPI Essential Freshwater Fund. So acknowledge your contribution there. Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, our purpose is on the board there to encourage and coordinate an integrated catchment by catchment approach to intergenerational land and water stewardship between the Rakaia and Rangitata rivers from mountains to sea. So that's quite a broad scope. How we intend to achieve that, the catchment community model is across the whole of the country. And it's a very simple, repeatable formula of engaging with rural communities, education around some of the changes that have come about and some of the challenges, opportunities and solutions that have been identified. And in doing that, you're empowering the community to become more involved. And then we start again, more engagement, greater education and more empowerment as a result. The background, some of you will be aware of this, but the concept started in 2018 in the Hekio Hines catchment. There was a lot of conversations happening there in and around the water space and some of the challenges there, and we looked to find suitable biodiversity projects off the back of some of the challenges that we were seeing at the Ashburton Water Zone Committee that weren't perhaps being addressed to the degree that our group desired. So the question became, where do we start? In 2020, the Eifelton Biodiversity Collective started with Hamish McKenzie, a local farmer there, putting his hand up to form a catchment group. That's now a bigger group across the whole of the lowlands. So that's grown and developed since then. In 2021, the steering group presented to the Ashburton Water Zone Committee. So do we have a mandate to talk about catchment groups in the Hekio Hines? And at that time we engaged with Rose Ackland and Laurie Prouting from the Upper Rangitata Land Care Group, which started back in 1990. So they had some words of encouragement and shared a bit of their knowledge about what had been successful. We then hosted a community meeting in the Southern Rugby Club rooms with over 60 Hinds residents and some from outside the district coming along, and it's that stage that we learnt about. There were similar conversations happening in the foothills and in the Upper Hinds. So it became pretty apparent that the Hikio Hinds Catchment Collective needed to be broader and take in the whole of Mid-Canterbury. So we pivoted there. December last year, the Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective became an incorporated society. We received $30,000 worth of seed funding from the Ashburton Zone Committee for a coordinator. So someone to join the dots across Mid-Canterbury and also put us in a position that we were able to submit a funding application to the MPI Essential Freshwater Fund, a new fund that had been developed. While we were waiting to hear back from that, we got our stage 1 of our strategy workshop underway in conjunction with Dairy NZ, who supplied a facilitator to help us with that process. October, we found out we were successful in our funding bid, $950,000 across the next 3 and a bit years to invest in our region. More or less, with our first anniversary this month, year one's been very much around getting our house in order, relatively big job and lots of stakeholders. So trying to figure out who's doing what in our patch and how can we enhance that, how can we strip out some of the duplication or avoid creating any more and look at the gaps. So that's quite, I can't say admin heavy, but planning heavy there. Now that year one's out of the way, next year will be more around development and growth. We're focused on the fact that we are community-led and solution-focused, and we're built on collaboration and trust, which is just building on the foundation of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy approach. The objective is to bring the ideas, action and science together to improve our environmental footprint, support catchment group initiatives and champion community wellbeing. So that's about the environment and about the people, making sure that when we talk about sustainability, it's across the board. We acknowledge that people are our greatest assets, and across many decades we've had some true leaders and champions in our region. So uniting with them, and we kind of see the catchment group model that's developed across New Zealand as a second tranche of that, so supporting the volunteers and resourcing them so that it doesn't become too much heavy lifting for a small particular group. The Catchment Collective Committee, as you can see, don't need to go through the names, but that's the structure, and myself as coordinator, and introduce newly welcomed Janine Holland on board as our lead facilitator, so going to help some of the catchment groups in terms of their development and support. The catchment groups we're currently working alongside are the Foothills Catchment Group, chaired by David Ackland. Hikio Hinds Hill Country Catchment Group, initially started by John Chapman, but now co-chaired by Nick France and Harley Davies. And the Hikio Hinds Lowlands Group, initially started by Hamish and now co-chaired with John O'Connell. The two existing groups that we have already, Landcare groups, are the Upper Rangitata and the Whitcomb Landcare Group in the Rakaia Gorge, and there's various degrees of progress with conversations happening in the groups listed along the bottom. And I just wanted to identify that Carters Creek and Tynwald as a key priority for the Ashburton Water Zone Committee, so therefore Environment Canterbury and Ashburton District Council. The stakeholder engagement thing, this has been a big, busy space for a very long time, looking at forming strategic partnerships where it makes sense, and again, building on the strength of the work that's happened in across our region previously. We have developed agri-women discussion groups, so understanding that we don't have a good sense of what all the different perspectives are from inside the farm businesses, so getting a group of 30-something, 40-something women together to just have a discussion of possibilities, really, what it looks like from their perspective, and ensure that those ideas are being incorporated as we build and develop our strategy. Runanga relationship building to date has gone really well. I think it's helped with the current relationship between the zone committee and some of the key members. So most of the conversations are happening in and around biodiversity at this stage. Again, the freshwater space is already busy enough. We don't need to pile on into that, but how can we enhance it with riparian planting, better managing wetlands and springs, and biodiversity is a significant component of that. Some of the feedback we've received to date, and in particular from our catchment groups, collective change empowers community and encourages everyone to care for our natural resources. And the main thing to come through is that farmers learn best from other farmers. We'd want to celebrate that leadership and scale up the positive change that we're seeing day to day. We had our inaugural field day, which was very well attended, Kelly Farm Soil Health and Nutrient Loss Mitigation Field Day. It was about having some curious conversations and upscaling engagement. Seems like one of the first principles of is to dig a hole and have a look. So we did that, and the feedback and the momentum. So this is a bit of a rolling mall of conversations. We don't have a field day and it's one and done. We're looking at developing a catchment group in the Hekio-Hines Plains. We're not a traditional catchment per se, with no surface water or catchments, rivers. It is the aquifers, so it's that out of sight, out of mind opportunity that comes about with that. Another project we have underway is the MCCC Water Science Update, so it's a historical review, so that was funded by the Ashburton Water Zone Committee. We have a summer student, Romy Vanderboom, who's come on board and working with our hypothesis there on stage 1, which is to collect and collate all available watermetric data. So finding the key people who have that information, where is it, in what format, and pulling it all together with the ultimate goal of making it publicly accessible. So it's quite scattered, and we're finding already that there's definitely some pockets of really useful information that needs to be drawn out into the light, so that we feel like we've got a really good in-depth understanding of what knowledge we have, so therefore we can look for the gaps in the analysis of that is stage 2. If anybody's interested, the steps of developing a catchment group, and I think the beauty of the catchment groups is they're across all farm systems. They're for young and old, so you get a mixture of perspectives around the table, and it's boys and girls. So where some groups that have been formed, it's specifically arable or dairy, for example, this brings the whole, the only relevance that you have, or the main relevance, is your topography. And the development stages there, we talk about thinking what's unique about your catchment and what challenges and opportunities that you're facing. We pull a group of people together to share ideas. If I draw on the Legmore Westerfield example recently, the variation of what had brought those locals into the room ranged from biodiversity to just coming with an open mind and, through to some consent challenges, so a range of ideas. So by engaging with MCCC to support them in that startup phase, we then bring a facilitator alongside them, so the locals get to be more governance and set the tone and set the direction, and the facilitator is resourced to go away and do quite a bit of the day-to-day stuff. So the action list for the farmers, for example, doesn't become too much of a burden. And we're encouraging them to talk to other existing catchment groups to share ideas. The ultimate outcome is to develop a catchment action plan, and the templates for those is something that Janine and I are working on together in conjunction with other catchment groups across the country. What have they done? The MPI Essential Freshwater Fund, 4 key criteria. I won't read them out. It's there in black and white, and happy to share this presentation. But I will say in the first instance, it's around improving capability and capacity here in our region. So what capability do we have? I believe an enormous amount. But in terms of capacity, we're finding that a lot of people are at full capacity. So how can we be more strategic, more cohesive, and better understand what are our priorities? so we don't have a scattergun approach and that information isn't coming to our rural communities via a fire hose. We kind of slow that all down and be much more holistic in our approach, all the way through to, once we've done all of that, out the bottom of this will fall some pretty engaging stories mapped on a QGIS layer that looks at who's doing what in which catchment with biodiversity and water and all the other key components. The way we're doing that, we've kind of structured, we're the hub in the middle, we're not telling people what to do, albeit within our incorporated society document, within our funding proposal, within our milestones and our KPIs, we do have some things that we are obligated to deliver on, and that looks different in the freshwater space. Stakeholder engagement's a big one. Wellbeing, the business plan is what's the big picture after the 3 years, so what's our value proposition. Catchment groups is the obvious one, biodiversity and soil and nutrient management. So that's more or less our integrated approach of how we look at where all those things are individual components, but they all merge together when you're working inside the farm gate. And really strong on the messages of taking time to celebrate all the good stuff that is happening. So really identify what is it, where is it, who's doing it, and be proud of the story that we have to tell as a region.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Lovett? No? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Angela, just when I saw this coming up, I wasn't sure where we're going, because we've got that many groups around Rent. Yeah, I look at DOC, ECAN, Council, everybody, the First group. What are you trying to do? Trying to get them all together, or is it just a new group? How do I have to see it? I think a lot of things that you've been saying is getting done already. Is that correct, or are you doing something completely different?
So and this is through the zone committee hat that I wear, there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's not cohesive. So, and it's not coordinated. So we've got Dairy NZ, for example, coming into the region doing some really cool stuff. Mm-hmm. But their concern is that they're not managing to get the science and some of the other really important stuff that they've got landed inside the farm gates. So there's this huge tsunami of information coming at, the target audience, which is the rural communities, and everybody's trying to vie for their attention. So the objective here is to slow all that information down, and again, to be really quite cohesive. And what are the key messages? So Dairy NZ might think the most important message today is winter grazing. Somebody else is saying, well, it's not, it's a waka ekanoa. So some really big, high stakes conversations happening, but it's craziness how it's panning out. So if we could take a really collaborative approach and talk about in your catchment.
Sorry, and we is what you're trying to do at the moment, is that correct? Yes. The we? Yeah, yes. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so a collaborative approach in your catchment, what we're doing is we're going to the communities and saying, how can we help? What do you see your priorities are? So we're not going in there telling them, we're actually offering our assistance. And so the priorities, the uniqueness is coming from the people who are living it day to day.
Thank you.
Councillor Lovett?
I'd just like to add on to that. I've been along to some of these days, and there's some great stuff happening in this space when you see local farmers joining together and looking at their water races and thinking of great ideas of planting and those stones put in for the fish, for the little pools. But I was just going to say, look, we seem to be focusing on the farmers out there at the farm gate, but there is another big group of people out there on lifestyle blocks, and they kind of feel they're not connected into anything. And I'm wondering whether that's a space you could be getting those ones involved in groups, the lifestylers, because they have a lot of water races and issues, and they don't feel part of the farming community. Some of them, they're kind of isolated. Where that's another group of people you could create little groups there, some catchments together.
So as a lifestyle block owner in Eifelton, very much involved in, you're part of that catchment or that catchment community, so you've got equal say. And in some areas, for example, if I look at the Foothills group, they've got Mount Hutt ski field. They've got the bike park up there, so it's not just about farming, it is about that catchment community and everything that that brings. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just a comment that was made, you know, a couple of lifestyle blocks, they kind of feel different to people, the big landowners, and whether there's something there you could create.
Thank you.
Councillor Ellis?
Thank you, and hello Angela, how are you?
Thanks,
Good,
Russell.
good. Ashburton to Rangitata seems to have quite a few of these focus groups, and Waterzone seems to have concentrated on that area. We have Mar, and the Heinz-Hekio area has a lot of attention. How are we going to get engaged with those people from the Ashburton River to the Rakaia? Because there just doesn't seem to be quite the same, maybe they don't have the same issues, I don't know, but there just doesn't seem to be quite the same amount of groups out there in that sort of area, especially along the coastline side.
Good question. So in the Hekio Hines, just as a point of clarification, we've had a collaborative meeting with HH Wet, with MHV, with Hines Drains Working Party and BCI, so the key stakeholders in that area, and had a robust conversation about who's leading, who's following, who's supporting, who's doing comms, you know, and so that we're not, so we've got a really clear direction, which has been a very useful process to go through. So I think we have a bit of a framework for how we replicate that elsewhere. Just last week we presented to the Ashburton Lyndhurst Board, and they've offered to help support, get some catchment groups up running in their patch, which is identifying some leaders, or just, because it's not an area I'm familiar with, who are the people, who are the Hamish Mackenzies and the Nick and Harleys. So, and likewise, BCI, very engaged, new chief executive there, and Jan Early, their board chair, all kind of saying, how can we help get this sort of initiative up and running in our area? So we've loosely called it Rakaia East, Rakaia West. We've kind of got a bit of a bar hill up there happening, but it's until we identify the leader who's going to put their hand up and say, I'm happy to shoulder tap. So big opportunities there, and behind the scenes, lots of conversations happening and evolving really quite nicely. We thought it was going to be quite difficult to get those up and running. Now what we're finding is we're needing to bring on, like Sif Janine, to catch up, because we're now racing to try and, you know, meet the demand.
Councillor Hooper?
Thank you. Hey, Ange. How can we help each other, council and MCCC?
Big question. Yeah, I think first and foremost, so the letter of support, that was a good start. I think via the zone committee, the action plan that we have there, that's been set under the zone implementation program, the CWMS, I think as we all look to, for our guiding, you know, North Star, what is the big thing that we're all trying to achieve here, and make sure that we keep circling back and honouring all that work that's gone on over the last 13 years. So we're certainly not interested in reinventing the wheel. And again, I use the zone committee as the table where we have Runanga, ADC, ECAN and community all sitting around looking at some of the similar challenges and opportunities. So I think if we can lean into the spaces where this exists, and you talked about the biodiversity working group, so is that a conversation for there? And then what do we do with it? So using the networks that you guys and the committees already, the wellbeing conversations that we've been having, ADC's quite an anchor for a lot of those conversations, and we're only small, you know, we've only got a small amount of funding really relevant to, so we don't want to have to do all of the heavy lifting when we can share some ideas. Yeah.
Thank you. Angela, after you've spent the 950k over 3 years or whatever, what does the success look like?
So the first part of the funding, and as a committee, as we're finalising our strategy, is very much around building a value proposition that looks at using that 3 years to springboard on what does it look like after that. So we're kind of doing the 2050 thing. because that makes sense. What does success look like in 2050, and what are the short, medium, long-term goals we need to do to get there? So already we've got some really supportive local businesses helping us. RMF Silver, for example, really leaning in. They've got a lot of rural people as part of their client base, so they see the importance of what we're doing. Is the goal to one day get sponsor partners or strategic partners on board, so that when we have thriving rural communities, we all do well off the back of it. Some of what that man just talked about here, flashback to the 80s. So I think if we can develop a sustainable strategy that looks at building a foundation across the next 3 years under those criteria, which is pretty good criteria really, and then looking at the opportunities to grow on that, but then how do we fund it and how do we resource it? And it has to have a value proposition. So the farmers are now saying, there's a per hectare rate that they'd be happy to contribute, but are there other local businesses who equally value what we're doing that would be keen to come on board? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a roundabout way, I think it does. Yeah.
Yep.
Janine, you want to add anything, or you're good?
Look, I would just say I think it's hugely exciting. I mean, some of you know that I came from a background in Environment Canterbury, so I'm very aware of the perceptions that there are already a number of agencies and community groups working in these spaces. I guess the value of catchment groups that we see nationally is that when farmers feel like they have control of their own destiny, they're going to be more committed, and we're going to see that buy-in actually translate. So, we're looking to build something with the community that's self-sustaining, and that, that will continue. And there's lots of examples. Ange has probably already relayed some of these. I know she has in other environments around how this model's worked really effectively in Southland and Otago. Canterbury seems to be, and Mid-Canterbury, perhaps a little bit late to adopting this way of working, possibly because we've had the irrigation schemes here for so long, and they've already filled some of these spaces and I guess, private enterprise. But, the conversations, I've only been brought on board very recently, and people are really excited, and they're not just seeing it as a way to address problems that exist or perhaps regulatory challenges, but also focused on the opportunities. So, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Janine. And I just note the comment that when farmers control their own destiny, they'll be more involved, which is 100% correct. And of late, they haven't been able to do that. They've had things forced upon them from Wellington, as in freshwater policies, and Hieka Wakanoa, where they were involved, but then it all turned to custard at the last minute when government decided something different to what they'd be working with, and they lost confidence with central government anyway. So farmers controlling the destiny, 100% behind that. Yep. Lane.
Yeah, just one question after you started talking. You talk rural all the time. Would it be not better to get town in as well, in the villages as well? Because a lot of stuff, here in town doesn't happen either. We're talking farmers. They're doing all the good things. But there's a lot of people living in town who just say, those bloody farmers not doing it. Can we bring it into town and show them as well how it should be done? You need the whole community to get going.
So the catchment group that is Carter's Creek through Tynwald and obviously feeds into Lakewood, so that's urban and rural. So absolutely looking for opportunities to develop an urban-rural link where we can. We need to make sure that we don't dilute the conversation so much that it's not actually targeted at what people have turned up for. So initially we're being quite targeted, and obviously with our funding, with the MPS for freshwater driving it, it is very farm focused, very rural focused. But there will be ways that we can link in with some of the challenges that you guys have with different water conversations, different but the same. But if the model works with how we're starting it, there are definitely opportunities to expand and grow that. And we'd be open to having conversations about that with whoever's keen.
Looking forward.
Looks like you've got a contact there. Thanks very much for the presentation, enlightened us and informed us on what you're doing, so thank you for that. Annual report's still not here, so we're going to break for a cup of tea now. Then we'll have the councillors' reports and mayor's report after that with the annual report. That'll conclude the open part of business. Angela, Janine, more than welcome to join us for a cup of tea and have a chat. So we'll adjourn now for a cup of tea. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody, from the cup of tea break. It's good. So we'll get now on to item number 12 and councillor reports. And we have a report there from Deputy Mayor McMillan. Any comments on that? Questions, if I may try and answer them if there was any? Not. Moving on to the report from Councillor Lovett. Well done, Councillor Lovett. And there's a couple of things there you've highlighted which could do with maybe some council assistance. Timmel Memorial Hall, looking for assistance. If you'd like to talk to them.
If I start at the top, the Ricai, I've got a new building going on there, and the whole grounds need power upgrading, and they kind of, it's been in the background, and it's really come to a head now that that building's going to be built, and they're having to look at their water supply out there. Tinwald Hall, the members on that board, they're getting elderly, and the gardens are in a bit of disrepair, and they're asking if the council can bring them back up to standard, and they'll do what they can do. And that hall's used every day of the week, and yeah, some of the people kind of leave it in a bit of a mess, and it's left for them to clean up and repairing tea wagons and stuff, which is. Yeah.
Just to generally comment how we do this, so rather than, I haven't got an answer for every thing that Councillor Lovett has mentioned in here, but what we do with this is our person who is our coordinator of all the reserve and hall committees, which is Claire Harden. She goes to these meetings, she gets these minutes, and she's our conduit for the requests that come through to them into the organisation to see where we can help, what they need. There may be budget constraints, but we need to give that answer back to the committees. So I think, I'm not trying to deprecate from the questions in here, but each of these matters is already coming into the organisation and being passed through Claire to various staff, and the committees are getting answers. So councillors themselves can take some comfort from these matters being handled internally.
So they're basically just kind of points that came out at all the meetings, and most of them, they're all run by very, very small committees. Some of them are quite dedicated small committees, and others have got older people on them, and sort of looking down in the future, what's going to become of these areas. Is council ultimately at the end of the day going to take them on in a few years, 5 years time, or we've just got to kind of revamp it and get more people in the districts involved. And some of the facilities are really, really good, but those are just basically things that I've.
Yeah. Thanks for that good informative report. Keep the councillors updated on what you've been up to. So thank you very much for that. Any questions of Councillor Lovett? Councillors? No. If not, would someone like to move the reports be received?
Can I move my report?
Yep. Councillor Lovett, Councillor Cameron. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Move over the page to the Mayor's report. And just 13.1, the reflection on the year been a busy year, another busy year. The normal, what seems more normal, interruptions through the year with COVID and crises is happening. And just like to thank you all for your input over the year, getting the things done that we have got done, which is good, and wish you all a merry and prosperous new year. And well done. We also have the regional event funding 13.2 panel, which was set up during COVID to bring events into the district, and it's got another 2 years to run, 1 year, 2 years to run, and they meet regional event funding, and they need the person appointed there. So I've got a recommendation there that Councillor Phil Hooper is appointed as Council's rep on the regional events funding panel until it's wound up in 2023. Someone like to move that? Councillor Brown, Councillor Todd. All put the motion. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. If there's any questions of the Mayor, Tony. Councillor Todd.
Oh, sorry.
I'll move that we receive the Mayor's report.
Second that for you.
Councillor Brown. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried, thank you. So now we'll go back to item number 10, which is the adoption of the annual report. You'll have got the independent auditor's report on emailed to you just recently. So you have that. The audit report, the audit report, annual report rather, has been put on Stella, 212 pages. Don't think Tony's that keen on reading it to you, but she will if you want. But not keen. But you've had it for the last whatever week or so, or not quite that long to read. Is it? Okay. All right. It's been a work in progress, and it's been tough to get there. So, Leanne.
Through the Chair, the annual report was circulated as part of the minutes, I would have thought, from the Audit and Risk. We did present it there and ask that they accept, was it the Audit and Risk or the previous council? Sorry, previous council reviewed it. So it was on Stella, but we have made a couple of changes, but I'll hand back to the team to talk on that one.
Okay. Anything further to add? Tony, you're in. Hamish?
Perhaps I could just say a couple of things as a sort of an umbrella statement. And councillors are no doubt aware of the sort of pressure that has been on the Audit Office and Resources, and that pressure spills onto the organisations that they are auditing because of those resource implications. And you may recall that in the COVID times, the government changed the law to give an extra 2 months to organisations like ours to still be lawfully audited, and that has stayed in place. We are aware around us there are a number of councils whose audit has not yet started. We're aware through the media there are a number of councils where the audit has not gone particularly well and has been suspended into the new year and going past the statutory deadline of 30 December. So I am actually really delighted and want to pass on my congratulations and thanks particularly to Erin, Hayley and Leanne and Tony for the work that has gone into getting this annual report to you before the end of the statutory time with the now circulated clear audit opinion. It has been a significant undertaking to get it to this point. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone at the council. We are very appreciative of the efforts that you guys have had to make to achieve this outcome today. So I just wanted to say those umbrella comments, Mr.
Thanks, Hamish. And also, I'd like to echo those comments too to Hayley, Erin, Leanne and Tony for all the hard work you've done to get it to this stage. And it's every time you do an annual report, it takes a bit of getting there, and being delayed, it doesn't help, and getting auditors when you want them. So you've done an amazing amount of work to get it there, and thank you for that. We don't see the input that you put into it, but I hear it is huge. So thanks very much to all of you. And met the statutory deadline as well, which is good. Next year, I think that's gone back to October 30, I think, is it?
Yes, that's what we're being told by Audit New Zealand.
Yeah. So it'll be a challenge to shift it back, but not only for us, but for every other government-controlled agency, councils in particular. Anything further you want to add to the report you would need to highlight to us, or...?
Just on the actual audit opinion, to find the words, they don't use the words unmodified anymore, but if we look at the emphasis of matter, which is there on page, gosh, I don't know if it's numbered, further down you'll find emphasis of matter, and they talk about the Three Waters reform program, and that's consistent across all of our councils, but they do state quite clearly, without modifying our opinion, we draw the attention to note 45. So every council, every district council would have to write something in that form that we've done for this report.
Yeah, thanks for identifying that. And Three Waters is going to be interesting going into the long-term plan as well. Going to create more work, and perhaps unnecessarily, but it's, it is what it is, and we can't change that, so we just abide by what we have to do. But and I know we will know it'll impact you, but you'll do the best you can. So.
Yeah, that's right. We think the only way we can prepare a long-term plan with the law as it now is, but with significant commentary from national politicians in opposition currently in an election, is that we will actually have to prepare two long-term plans for you, one with water in and one with water out. So it's a horrifying thought from a staff point of view. The long-term plan is a significant undertaking anyway, and to do to do two versions of it is a little bit horrifying, but we can see no other way, because if we prepare it with water out, which would be the current law, we're not involved in water from 1 July 24 under the current law, but then if that law was repealed with only a few months before the 1st of July, we would need to have an alternate long-term plan ready to go. So 2023 looks just as busy as 2022.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Lovett?
If we have to do two reports, with the water entity, will they have to give us a payment for doing a next report? For because it's basically for them, isn't it?
No, the water entity won't exist. So you won't be getting any payment from a water entity because they won't exist until 1 July 2024. So they won't be. But to the sentiment of your question, I guess it's more directed at the government,
yes,
as opposed to the water entity. But it won't be the water entity that would be paying because they won't exist at the time we'll be doing those reports.
So
whether or not the government supports such things is a moot point. They may well argue they're already supporting us via the transitional funding arrangements they have in place with us.
I'm just sort of wondering whether it's something we can take up, because every council in the country is going to be faced.
But you'll get no support from the government currently, Councillor, because they've passed a law that says you won't be doing it. Why would they want to support people to do it B2? That says that they assume they're not going to be the government. So I can't imagine that's a likely outcome.
It is what it is. Any questions on the annual report? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I was just wondering, because I haven't had a lot of time to absorb this, are there any of the key performance markers that we haven't met that we should be showing concern at all, or are they all just, I know some are very close, so those ones I'm not worried about, but when I looked through it, there were one or two which we were a wee way away from where we would like to be. Are any of those something we should be looking at and be worried about?
Through the chair, I'll just talk from the non-financial, so that's the front end, all the words side of things. The visitor numbers through EA Network Centre, we were quite under counted in the last 12 months for that. That was a whole host of things. COVID was obviously one of them, but also there was a change in terms of how we count, and so that led to an 8-week period where we couldn't rely on the data that we had. So there's systems in place that will fix that now, and this next financial year, or the current financial year we're in, will be all good, but that does show up quite noticeably. And that's the top of my mind.
Yes.
Otherwise, they're all fairly standard.
Yes, okay. There's one in here I'd like to highlight for the public. Under transportation, we filled 6,034 potholes. So, when they're saying we don't do a lot, that's a lot of potholes that have been fixed. So, I think that's an excellent achievement.
Don't think they got them all, but they did 6,000 of them. Yeah. Yeah, it is. No other further questions? Would someone like to move that we adopt the 21-22 annual report? Councillor Ellis?
Is there someone from the last two?
Yes, and I'll second that. Happy.
Councillor Cameron, Councillor Lovett. Moved and seconded. Any further debate, discussion? Lane?
Also,
if not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Well done to you all. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Councillor, that takes us to the end of the open part of the meeting. So I'd like someone to move that we move into committee.
So moved.
Councillor Todd, Councillor Brown, all in favour, please say aye. Carried.